Our next storyteller, Amy Hutchisson.
I have been a mother for almost 2 decades, and that makes me feel really old. But the other day, as I say, several months ago now, a friend of mine announced her pregnancy. And after all of the, congratulations, she came to me and she said, you and I, we both grew up in these really strict religious households. And I don't want to raise my kids like that. And I've seen you with your kids, and that's not how you raise your kids. So I was wondering, can you tell me your secret? And I said, I'd love to, if I knew what it was. And I said, let me get back to you on that, because, I hadn't condensed my 20 years into a 30-second elevator pitch. So I thought about that and started to think of some of the defining moments in my life. And one thing that you need to know, a couple things you need to know. I was married to my husband for 15 years before he died, and we have 3 kids together. And he was gay. Coming from this strict religious environment, they taught us that you could pray the gay away. And just, go ahead and marry a woman and, God will heal you. That didn't work, in case anybody was wondering. But as my kids were starting to move on after my husband died, as I was starting to move on after my husband died, I was really interested in this intersection of, what it's like to be gay and being in the church. And I really wanted to just get to know a little bit more about what that was like. So I read a bunch of books, and I watched a bunch of videos, and I listened to podcast episodes. And there's one video in particular that I watched frequently. And my oldest, who was 15 at the time, came to my room and said, Mom, why are you watching that? Are you a lesbian? And I had to laugh because, it was so close, but also off the mark. And I said, no, I'm not a lesbian. Oh, okay, because really when you're 15, you don't care that much about what your parents do. And I realized it was time to tell my kids that my husband had been gay, because that was something that he kept very close to the vest, and at least my 15-year-old. So we went for a drive, because when you have something that's important and scary to sell someone, if you drive, you don't have to look them in the face. So I was like, all right, let's start with the video. And I was like, hey, remember that video that you asked me about the other day? And you asked if I was a lesbian, and I said I was not. And at this point, it was very important to me to let my child know I hadn't been lying to them. And so I said, and that's true, I'm not a lesbian. And I opened my mouth, just ready to say, but your dad was gay. And next to me, my child says, I am. Well, actually, I'm half a lesbian. I'm bi. And this is not how I expected this conversation to go. So as I'm picking my wits up off the dashboard, I realize I've been watching all these videos. One of them was called What to Do When Your Child Comes Out. And I'm like, wait, I know this one. And I said, thank you for telling me, and I love you. And is there anything else that you want to tell me about this right now? No, not really. Okay. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because actually, you know what? Your dad was gay. And that brought up a lot of questions. Like, why on earth did you marry him? Did you not know? Well, why did you stay together? Why didn't you get divorced? And that was about a 45-minute conversation that followed, because honestly, there's a lot of nuance to it. And it's hard to explain to somebody who didn't grow up in this really restrictive, strict religious environment that teaches you things that aren't true. And as I was thinking about that, I realized there might be something here. Because a couple weeks after that drive, I got a text message. And it was my oldest. "Hey, Mom, are you transphobic?" "No." "Why?" "Oh, I was just curious." "Okay. What would you say if I came out as trans?" "Probably the same thing that I said when you came out as bi, that I love you and I'm glad you told me." "Oh, okay." Looking at my phone, and those 3 little dots pop up, and then they go away. And then they pop up again, and they go, and then they pop up again. I'm starting to think that I might know what's coming next. So the message comes through. "Mom, I'm trans. Please use this name and, these pronouns for me." And so I type back, "Thank you for telling me. I love you." And honestly, I was a little bit confused because when I was growing up, trans wasn't a thing. I mean, obviously it was a thing. There were trans people, but nobody talked about it, at least not in the circles that I ran in. We barely talked about people who were gay. And I was wondering, how is this different? Because I was a tomboy growing up. I liked to wear pants and climb trees and play with bugs. And I was frankly really annoyed that I had to go to Girl Scouts where they taught us how to sew cushions and dip candles. And I couldn't go to Boy Scouts where they taught us to tie knots and set things on fire. And I tried to ask my oldest, I said, what is this like for you? Can you explain it? And they really didn't have the words to give me. But I wanted to really get it. And so as I thought some more, I realized I spent a lot of time not wanting to be a girl. I'm in my 40s now, and I still have moments where I don't really want to be a woman. Because frankly, our society does not treat women very well. And it occurred to me, after I'd really just kind of let this settle in my mind for a while, that I didn't want to be a girl. I didn't want to be a woman, but I never thought I wasn't one. I never thought I was something else. And about that time, as I was remembering all of this, I got back in touch with my friend Addie, and I said, "I think I get it. I think I know. And it's not like this is the perfect answer that all of a sudden everybody will understand and everybody will just be able to be the best parent ever. Because it doesn't work that way. I knew how to be the best parent ever, actually, before I had kids. But I said, right from the start when I had children, I learned that I had to hold my expectations loosely. Because somehow in between them being inside and coming out, it was like a whole different kid. And there was something to that, whether the coming out was the birth or the coming out was out of the closet. This is the same kid, but I'm seeing them completely differently. And I said, your parents and my parents, they loved us. There was no question about that. They did the best that they knew how. But they had this idea that there was a certain mold that we were supposed to fit. And they did their best to raise us growing up into that mold. And I said, the thing that I have learned is that when you have your kids, you love them. We all love our kids. Almost everybody in the world loves their kids. And it's a little bit more than that, because it's not just loving our kids. It's accepting our kids as who they really are and not just who we want them to be. And it's honoring our kids' self-knowledge of the places inside of themselves that we can't see. And I said, that's what's important. You need to love your kids. And you need to accept your kids, and you need to honor your kids, even when you don't understand them, perhaps even especially when you don't understand them.